Hi, my name is Juan, and welcome to The Couch, a podcast where real therapists talk about real things. Please remember that we are therapists, but we are not your therapists, and this podcast is intended for educational purposes only.
Hello. I speak with amazing people every week. And something they share with me is they say, my life, if you look at it, maybe on a resume, on a sheet of paper, it looks fine, right? It looks like I'm doing okay. And then they tell me, they go, but I feel tired, man. I feel drained. Or maybe they say, I'm not depressed. I'm just tired of everything. And it's this overwhelm. So today what I like to do, today we're going to talk about emotional exhaustion. What it actually is, why so many people experience it, and not only experience it, but experience it in a quiet way. And that's one of the things about emotional exhaustion, that sometimes it's not loud. I started today's episode by mentioning on a sheet of paper, everything looks okay. And that's because emotional exhaustion can hide behind layers. Not just surface level self-care, right? We're not just going to go into that. We're going to go into some actual real relief. So let's start with what emotional exhaustion really is. It really isn't about someone being lazy. It's not about being unmotivated. Heck, it's not that you're weak. It's none of those things. Emotional exhaustion is this ongoing impact on your nervous system. Because you see, when your nervous system stays on for too long, it's like having a light switched on for too long. At some point, you're going to look at the electric bill and go, damn, right? That's a big bill to pay. Well, if your nervous system stays on for too long, everything is just going to overwork itself. So here's an example here. A parent who gets everyone ready in the morning, right? They're waking up 5 a.m., getting the whole house ready, lunch ready, breakfast ready. And that same parent, they work all day. And then they got to get home and they got to manage all the household duties and expectations. They got to remind themselves and remind others of all the appointments that they have for the week and the month. And then on top of that, they also got to support their partner emotionally, their kids emotionally, their family emotionally. And at night, this parent just falls on the couch. Not because they're exhausted. And those things sound exhausting, don't they? But because they are depleted, right? So there is a difference there. Exhaustion, depletion. Or it could be a working professional. Maybe you're an attorney listening to this. High-functioning individual. Show up at work. You're reliable at work. They can go to you when things need to get done. You're effective. You get home. There's a big but. But I get home. And though I am this competent, hardworking, high-functioning professional, I get home and I am just numb at home. Right? So this high-functioning professional, they're not falling apart. Right? They're trying to hold it all together. And it's coming at a cost. So then when they get home, they're just numb, right? Emotional exhaustion is often hard to see. It's invisible, right? Because you're still functioning. That's the thing. It makes it such a challenge to really spot it, because the person keeps going. The parent, they keep waking up morning after morning. The high-functioning attorney, lawyer, construction worker, teacher, they keep showing up. You're just doing it without reserves, right? They are just doing it without reserves. Hence that depletion. And we got to think about why so many people feel this way right now. So I think about the culture that we live in. Sometimes I find that we live in a culture that really rewards over-functioning. Rewards being dependable. Rewards those that are mighty and strong and brave. right, bows down to the individuals that show up without complaining. And I know that a lot of those things are what we want to teach our kids, right? Like, do it without complaining. Show up. Give it 110%, 111%. Be dependable, right? Those are, in true words, those are character traits that someone wants to work towards. And there's a big and, right? We want to do it in a balanced way. So here's an example. I see couples where one partner says to the other, they say, hey, I don't know why they are so distant from me lately, right? Something's up, something's going on. Then the other partner, right, they lean into them and say, hey, empty is what I feel. I don't feel distant. I just feel empty. I feel depleted. And you can see in that example how that emotional exhaustion just really finds its way in there. Imagine if that's that parent that's also in a relationship, or they're doing all those things. Perhaps it's not that they're feeling distant from the other person. They're just saying, hey, I'm empty. I'm depleted. I notice within our culture, our first generation professionals, right? So you feel this constant pressure to succeed. Maybe you're the first in the family to go to college, first in the family to buy a house, first in the college to get a brand new car, right? You've done something and you're standing out. You're a first generation professional. And there's some space to define that in different ways. So you've got this pressure over you. I got to succeed. I got to provide. I don't want to mess up. I can't mess up. I will not mess up. While just struggling to give yourself permission to pause, to take a break, to rest, right? So then you build that up ongoing. What's going to happen? It's going to lead to that emotional exhaustion. So emotional exhaustion, it's not a personal failure. I don't really see it in that way. I think it's much more of a systematic issue, right? So you're an individual. You're a dot on a sheet of paper. Make a big circle around you. And then you're going to make tiny little squares that are all in that circle. All of those are just items that are interconnected to you, creating internal, external pressures and expectations. Now, we got to figure out, right, this emotional exhaustion, where is it, right? What are the causes of it? Number one, chronic stress. Right? And not just chronic stress of, you're stressed on a Monday. Chronic means you're stressed on a Monday, Tuesday, next week, the week after, because it's chronic, it's ongoing, right? This isn't stress from a bad day or a bad week. It's stress that, right, it's that light switch that never comes down and never turns off. And number two, emotional labor in relationships. So you're thinking, what the heck does that mean? Well, emotional labor, right? Think about it as physical labor, but no one's seeing it, right? It's unseen. And how does that feel in a relationship, right? When you put in that work, emotional labor is not seen, right? No one's tracking the needs, the emotions. This could be a partner, right? The partner that remembers birthdays. They plan events and Valentine's Day and all these things, and they check in emotionally. And when something feels off, right? They know that. However, this ongoing leads to that person being what's called a manager, an emotional manager. And that emotional manager, hey, if you're the only one doing it, it becomes not only tiring, but exhausting. Even some resentment can build in there. So this can be a cause of emotional exhaustion, where you are the manager, the emotional labor individual in the relationship. And the last one, there's more, of course, is unresolved or ongoing trauma. Now, typically, this is not trauma from a singular situation that goes away. It's a trauma that can be singular while being a constant, right? So that's like growing up in a household where you experience some sort of trauma, and then that just builds into something that's ongoing in your life. It could be growing up in a space where there's repeated criticism, right? Neglect from those that are your caretakers. right? In and out support, lots of instability. What happens is that your nervous system, we talked a little bit about that earlier, your nervous system, it learns early that safety is not predictable, right? So then when safety is unpredictable, the nervous system's like, when do I turn off and on, man? And, if you think about the nervous system, look at it in the way of when something traumatic happens, like you're about to be in a car accident, your nervous system shuts on, right? Because it needs to be on guard. It needs to protect you during that time. But if it's on the whole time, that's not good. Some signs that you may be emotionally exhausted. You feel irritable over small things, tiny little things that bug you. There's this fogginess in your mind and your brain. You start to notice that. You may even some of you, I hear this often, is where maybe in the past you were okay having tough conversations, but then now certain conversations you're just like, no, I'd rather avoid that conversation. And then when you dig into it, like if we look at it right now, we go, well, why am I avoiding these conversations that I used to not avoid? Well, what happens is you start to look at those conversations and you could even just feel emotionally like, oh, that's going to be a lot. That's going to drain me. Another sign of emotional exhaustion is that someone may say, it's not sad that I feel. And then they dig around for words, and sometimes they'll find themselves landing on numb, right? It is numb that I feel, which is actually such a challenging sign that I think it's hard to really spot, because numb, you think about putting ice on you and you go, okay, well, that makes sense. I'm numb. But I find that it's a tough one to really define. And then the last one is, and this one people tend to see, snappy, agitated, on edge, right? And even towards people you care about, friends, family, right? But if you look at all this from the very beginning of our conversation of emotional exhaustion, you think, well, why? Why are these the signs? Well, it's ongoing stress, right? You're depleting yourself. And if you drew yourself on a sheet of paper and gave yourself all of these traits and attributes and skills, imagine if they became depleted over time. Then it makes sense that you would avoid a hard conversation, because those things that were full, they're depleted. So likely you don't want to jump back into it. So then what do we want to do here? What actually helps? I do think that self-care plays a strong role. The challenge of self-care is that engaging in it as in one-off, like, taking a nice bubble bath, going on a vacation, right? Well, what happens when you come out of the bubble bath? You still jump back into life. What happens when you come back from the vacation? You still jump back into life, right? So we want to look at that systematic issue that's happening. Emotional exhaustion requires addressing varying areas, right? And if you're that dot on the sheet of paper and you got all those squares around you that are impacting the emotional exhaustion, we want to think about creating boundaries with each of those squares. We want to think about developing emotional safety on an internal level. We want to think about developing skills that actually regulate the nervous system. From here, let's look at just a few strategies you could take with you before we close off for this episode. One that I like, it could be redundant, repeated over and over. I think it works really beautifully. It's a therapeutic technique where you focus on naming it. I know it's simple, right? Name it. Of course I can do that. So here, saying I'm emotionally exhausted, right? That can reduce shame immediately. So it can reduce even that internal dialogue that you're giving yourself, that, you should be doing more. You shouldn't give up. You have to keep going. All right. So if it's a Thursday and I go, you know what? I'm emotionally exhausted. What I'm actually doing is I'm giving myself permission to rest. And that's what this is about, right? To address the systemic overall issue, much of it has to do with you giving yourself permission. Second tool to use is looking at the emotional load that you're taking on. So get a sheet of paper, write down all the items that go into that emotional load. And then you're going to focus on delegating, redistributing responsibilities. An example of this is you got a couple. One of them is the emotional manager, right? They're planning all the trips, planning all the events, all the family detail, showing up for the other person. And they're starting to feel not only exhausted, right? They're depleted, they're resentful. Sit down with each other with a sheet of paper and then look at even implementing something like the 5 love languages. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to distribute that responsibility, right? Show up for each other while also looking at the day-to-day responsibilities too, right? Maybe give them some of that duty of planning trips. It may not be in the same manner that you want the trip planned, but you're looking more at the gesture than being an exact protocol. Third tip here, safety, emotional safety, right? That can start with words like, hey, I'm safe, I'm okay. When I do this, I like to implement a five senses exercise while also scanning the room. So what I'll do is wherever I'm at, I'll just scan my surrounding while asking myself, am I safe? And then I shift to, because quickly I'll see that I am safe. I'll shift to, I'm safe in here. I'm okay in here. And then I go into the five senses, five things that I see, four that I smell, three that I taste, and I work all my way down to the five senses so I get to one. That's a beautiful activity to help regulate the nervous system as well. The last one, working with a therapist, emotional regulations, it's a big topic. Regulating the nervous system is a big topic. Being in a safe space with a counselor, whether you come to my practice of Santos Counseling, one near you, working with a professional, sitting down, exploring your own relationship to emotional exhaustion, and then slowly chipping away so that you're able to not solely implement quick off and on self-care items, but address this on a systemic level. My friends, if you're listening and this relates to you, I'm glad. Yeah, I know emotional exhaustion is a tough topic. Emotional exhaustion is a response to that big bag that you're carrying, and you're carrying too much, and you're carrying it, my friend, for far too long. I want you to know that you're not broken, you're not alone. Support's here. I'm thankful that you're listening. I'm thankful you're a part of the community. If you're enjoying the podcast, share it, subscribe, like. I'll see you in the next episode.